All right. I've been trying to put this together for a while now, so I figured if I get on camera, maybe things will be easier. We'll see. But I'd like to say to start out with whoever's doing podcasting and YouTube stuff and things like that, you guys have a newfound respect for me because I've just tried to get this done for the last few hours, and in going back over the edits, you realize you say certain things a lot. You end up mincemeating the entire timeline just trying to do this. I come from a production background, no less, too, from my dad's work growing up. So I've seen this go on a lot, but it's really different when you're doing it yourself for the first time and you're starting to get into this. So good work. The basic point in all this is Ultimate Racing Tips and I have been looking at ways to try and bring you guys content for quite a while now. He's been really wanting to do this for a long time. It just hasn't been something he's been able to put together for a lot of reasons, mainly financial reasons, because it's not easy or cheap to do real racing in person. As many of you already know, with your own projects and your own cars, it's great as a hobby. And when you start really trying to be competitive, though, the cost is like exponential. You just can go forever with it. Even a very simple effort like autocross is still several $1,000s a year, just from entry fees to practice races to all sorts of stuff. And COVID's not making it any easier because there's fewer events and more people who want seats, which means those seat prices go up. So everything's more expensive than it normally is right now. And also there's less of them, so there's not as much time to be able to put into content like that from where we are. Geographically, Ultimate Racing Tips lives down in Southern California. I live in Northern California, so there's also a geographical divide there too. It made sense for us to move towards this, both from a content perspective, but also from an efficiency standpoint, because we don't need to be in the same place to do the same things. We can do a lot of contrast videos together, and hopefully you'll get a lot of really great content out of this that you guys can use in your own stuff. But anyway, I'll digress. This video is all about our sim racing setups for 2021. I've been wanting to do this for quite a while, and Ultimate Racing Tips and I have kicked around different ideas, and I finally was able to put together the money to get this taken care of and started. You'll notice our production quality is not that great right now. This is our first time at this, so we're going to be ironing out bugs on the way, but we will get better as we get on, and so I appreciate in advance your patience with us as we start out, and hope you guys will tag along for the ride. Without further ado, let's get into the sim racing setups and we'll show you what we're up to. So first things we're going to do is talk about the sim rig. This is the chassis that you use to bolt everything down, your steering wheel and pedal set, your seat, your shifter, any additional gear that you need to be able to do what you're doing. In our case, we're going to be starting with the GT1 Evo because we're not really sure how far we're going to need to go with adding equipment when it comes to doing streaming. Just from what I've seen around watching people online, they've got a lot of gear used for mixing the sound and the video and for hanging things off or VR setups and stuff like that. So I wanted to get us something that was fairly flexible for the long haul. So for something like, for what I'm going to be using, I'm going to have a direct drive wheel. This setup is very rigid and should not flex at all. Also, the pedal box is very stout and very secure, and I'm not at risk of having something go haywire during the middle of a race. There is the possibility I could save a little bit of money if I went and sourced all this stuff myself, but the amount of time I would spend designing it and cutting it and machining it and still not get the kind of quality here with this pedal box and the steering setup and the seat mounting options and things. It just makes sense to put all the money into something that's been well engineered than it is to try and just hack something together myself. If I was really strapped for cash, I might, but even then, with something like this, you're saving yourself the cost of time, and for us, that's kind of valuable. So in terms of the seat is not included with this rig, so you have to buy it separate. And for us, we need something that allows us to bolt it to the side. As you can see here, the seat they shows side mounting here where you can change the angle of the seat. And in our case, we're not going to be using a adjustable back seat. We're going to be using a one-piece bucket seat like this. So that is more crucial for us because that's how we will change the angle of the seat, since the back is permanent and it can't be adjusted. Going a little bit further than that, in terms of the seats, I looked into a lot of different types of seats. I mean, when you start talking about fixed back seats like this, there's not a lot of variation in terms of design. It's all pretty standard fare kind of stuff, and it doesn't need to be FIA approved. All of these seats at the entry level are going to have bottom mount. They're not going to have side mounting because the backs are fixed. It's more important to have that adjustment so that you can get the ergonomics correct in the rig. Ultimate Racing Tips and I have touched on this briefly in our podcast, but being comfortable in a sim rig situation is just as important as doing it in a real car, because you're not going to have forces moving you around. You're going to be locked into the seat for the entire time that you're there. So it's more crucial to be comfortable for a longer period of time when you're doing sim racing. Ultimate Racing Tips had a line-in with a company called Classic Industries, and although they support classic car restorations, they also offer seats by Corbeau. Corbeau has an option called the FX1 Pro, and this is your standard fixed bucket style seat. It's a little bit more upscale. It has sort of this suede material that should be nice and grippy, and on the side we notice it has side mounting. Also unique to this seat, it has bottom mounting as well. So you can choose to either mount it to a set of sliders, or you can choose to mount it to a side mounting plate system like this and then put a slider underneath. In our case, we're going to be using the sides to mount the seat, and then we're going to use the bottom to simulate road conditions on the car in the sim. One of the simulators I tested was by VRX, and at the time they had a simulator set up with a very simple chair and surround sound speaker system. Interestingly enough, they had put the subwoofer of the surround sound system underneath the seat, and I didn't really make sense of what that was for until I sat down in the chair and tried it. The sim I was playing was GTR, and I didn't know this at the time, but most racing games provide a ground loop, low-frequency sound effect track that creates vibration in the form of what tires make with the road. As I continued to drive, I noticed that I was able to more accurately place the car in the track, and I was more able to accurately discern if the tires were actually creating traction or not in braking situations, in acceleration, in cornering. As the years have gone on, there have been different solutions that have come up instead of using subwoofers, which have their drawbacks, such as it's not a direct connection to the seat, first of all. It's an approximate connection. In terms of the area, when you live in an apartment like I do, that subwoofer means you're creating a very large low-frequency vibration that runs throughout the entire floor. The consequence of using it is upsetting all of my neighbors, which I'd like to frankly avoid. What do? Enter the tactile transducer. This system is an amplifier and a tactile transducer, and a tactile transducer is what might be considered today being called a haptic engine. So it creates vibration, but it doesn't do it in a way where it's sending it through the air, it's sending it through a surface. This is almost the exact same thing as a speaker coil on an actual speaker, except there's no cone. Instead, the vibration that's generated by the coil is fed through the surface that this is bolted to. And in doing that, you localize the vibration, and since it's not an air-based or airborne vibration, it's only going to the surface that it's hooked up to. The trick with something like this, though, is that there's no way to mount it provided by the company. You have to work that out for yourself. In my case, I tend to be very particular about that because I understand that it's very simple to drill holes and measure things, but I like to be fairly accurate with what I'm doing. It's not difficult to do things right the first time if you take your time with it. I could take this photo, or I could receive the product directly and then try and measure these things, but it's much simpler for me to just see if I can reach out and find out the information. I contacted both Corbeau for the seat bolt pattern of the bottom of the seat. I also reached out to Buttkicker and asked them to provide me the measurements for one of the holes, and then I can work out the dimensions from there. Well, Buttkicker actually went above and beyond, and they provided me with this. These are the CAD drawings from the Buttkicker mini concert transducer, and this shows me not only the dimensions of the housing, but it also shows me the dimensions of the bolt holes. So if we go here into Fusion 360 and I open my sketch for the plate, we can zoom in here a little bit, and you can see I've got my 100.94 circle, and then I've got my bolt holes, which are also keyed to the size that was shown on the diagram. And you'll notice I have 3 different patterns here. Part of the reason for that is right now, Ultimate Racing Tips and I are only going to be running one transducer. This means it's going to be sitting in the middle to evenly distribute the vibration across the seat. In the future, we may decide to run 2 of these, and this would allow us to be able to feel vibration that is specific to one side or the other. Say I'm going through a chicane and I want to be able to feel each curb on the left and right sides of the car as I go through. It would then send signals to the left side and then the right. There is a certain amount of overlap with these, so it's not foolproof. For now, one transducer is plenty and should give us an adequate amount of feedback. In terms of the overall design, we have our plate, And then our plate is bolted to some T-slot aluminum extrusions that we're going to get, and they're going to be on nuts that slide into these channels, and then bolts will go through here. In terms of the seat itself is going to be bolted onto these M8 bolts, and that will locate the entirety of this onto the seat bottom in a very rigid way. That will mean that as much of the vibration will pass through the seat as possible. And in doing so should mean that we're not going to have to run the transducer very hard at all. The reason you really want to try and isolate the transducer as close as you can to the bottom of the seat or to the surface you're working with is because the further away it is, the harder that you have to run it and the greater chance of it overheating it. But I really like to try and stay under those thresholds as much as I can. So again, trying to isolate this and make it a very solid transmission path for the vibration is of key importance. This is kind of where we're going with this. I haven't really touched on the steering setups or the pedals we're using yet because we're still kind of ironing those things out. But hopefully this gives you an idea of where we're headed. With regards to all of our production, thank you very much for taking the time to be patient with us as we grow. And you guys are more than welcome to send us questions. We'd love to go out and race with you guys once we're ready to do so. And really looking forward to getting this ball rolling in a very real way this year. Hope everyone's staying safe and hope to see you online here real soon.